Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time we're taking a look at Metcalfe's law.
Ooh, very interesting.
Yeah, and we're going to be using the sources that you, the listener, provided.
Oh, very cool. Always love getting to interact with the audience like that.
So yeah, we're going to try to take those sources and pull out the most interesting things and maybe even, get to some surprising insights.
I think we can definitely do that. There are some applications of this law that extend way beyond what people normally think of, like social media and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Like we might even touch on cryptocurrency and the metaverse today. Who knows?
Right. Lots to talk about.
Definitely. Okay, so before we get too far, I've heard of Metcalfe's law, but to be honest, I kind of forget what it is exactly.
Oh, yeah, sure. I can explain that.
So like in simple terms, could you lay it out for us?
Basically, it says that the value of a network is proportional to the square of the number of connected users in that network.
Okay, so like the more people who join a network, the more valuable that network is to everyone. Exactly. And crucially, it's not just a straight one-to-one relationship.
Right. So like two users aren't twice as valuable as one user.
Yeah, it's way more than that.
Yeah.
Like way more. The value grows much faster because it's proportional to the square of the number of users.
Okay, so it's that squared part that makes it really powerful.
Exactly.
Okay, so like what's the actual formula for Metcalfe's law?
So the formula is V is proportional to N squared.
Okay.
Where V represents the value.
Okay.
And N is the number of users.
Gotcha. So like help me visualize that. Let's say you've got a small online forum or something with just 5 users.
Okay.
There's only so many ways those 5 people can interact, right?
Right.
But if you add 5 more people, suddenly there's way more potential for interaction.
Way more, yeah.
Because now everyone has 9 other people they could potentially connect with.
Exactly. So you can see how that squared relationship leads to really explosive growth in the value of the network as more people join.
Okay, that's a great example. I think I'm starting to get it now. But like, what's the underlying force driving that growth? Like, why does the value increase so rapidly?
That's a great question. And the answer is because of what we call network effects.
Okay, so what are network effects exactly?
It's the idea that each new user adds value, not just by themselves,
Right.
but also by increasing the potential for everyone else in the network to interact and connect.
Okay, so like each new person who joins makes the whole network more useful and valuable for everyone who's already there.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So it's like a positive feedback loop where the more valuable the network becomes, the more people it attracts.
Exactly. And that leads to even more value and so on. It's kind of a snowball effect.
Gotcha. So this isn't just some new internet thing, right? Like, didn't Metcalfe's law come about way before the internet?
Yeah, actually, you're totally right. The idea has been around for a while.
Okay, so like where did it first come from?
Well, it was originally applied to telecommunications way back in the day of like the old school telephone.
Oh, that makes sense. Like, a telephone is pretty useless if you're the only person who has one.
Exactly. Like, who are you going to call?
Right. You need other people on the network for it to have any value.
Exactly. The more people who were connected to the telephone network, the more useful it became for everyone.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so how does that idea apply to the internet today?
Well, it's the exact same principle that's fueled the growth of all these giant social media companies we see today.
Oh, right, like Facebook and Twitter and all those.
Exactly. The more users they get, the more attractive those platforms become to new users.
Yeah.
Because there are more people to connect with.
Yeah, and the more users there are, the more valuable the platform is to advertisers and all that too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So Metcalfe's law is a big part of why those platforms have gotten so huge.
That is super interesting. Have you ever like stopped and thought about how those platforms just seem to keep growing and growing?
Oh, yeah, all the time. It's kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, it's like there's no end in sight. And it kind of makes you wonder about Metcalfe's law and how it's playing out right in front of us.
Oh, absolutely. And it goes way beyond just those big social media companies, too.
What do you mean?
Well, this law can also help us understand the growth of all sorts of things online, like smaller online communities,
Okay.
Or specific apps,
Right.
or even open source software projects.
Wow. So it's not just about these giant platforms with billions of users. It's happening on a smaller scale all over the place.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes it so fascinating. Like this one idea can be applied in all sorts of different contexts.
That is really cool. Okay, so we've talked a lot about social media, but are there other areas where Metcalfe's law applies?
Oh, yeah, tons.
Like, I know you mentioned cryptocurrency earlier.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
Okay, so how does it apply to cryptocurrency?
Well, remember how we talked about those network effects? They're a huge part of how cryptocurrencies gain value. Basically, the more people who are using a specific cryptocurrency, the more valuable and robust its network becomes.
Okay, so robust. What does that actually mean, like in the context of cryptocurrency?
So when we talk about robustness in a crypto network,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of boils down to a few things. Like first, a larger user base means increased security.
Okay.
With more people and computers participating in the blockchain, it becomes much harder for any one person to manipulate the system.
Right. So, like, the more people who are involved, the more difficult it is for someone to cheat or, like, hack the system.
Exactly, like strength in numbers.
Gotcha.
And the second thing is, as more people use a cryptocurrency to actually buy and sell things,
Yeah.
the easier it becomes to find someone who's willing to trade with you
Right.
at a fair price.
Okay.
We call that liquidity.
Okay. So, like, the more people who are using it, the easier it is to buy and sell it.
Exactly. It's kind of like a well-stocked store
Okay.
versus a store that has, like, empty shelves. You're much more likely to find what you need.
Yeah. And probably at a better price, too.
Exactly. So this increased liquidity makes the cryptocurrency more attractive
Makes sense.
to both, like, individuals and businesses.
Right.
It becomes a more viable and trusted way to do transactions.
So it's like a self-reinforcing cycle
Yeah.
where the more people use it, the more useful it becomes, which attracts even more people.
Exactly. And this brings us to a prime example,
Okay.
Bitcoin.
Ah, Bitcoin, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like every time I turn around, Bitcoin is in the news and the price is going up.
Yeah, Bitcoin is like the textbook example of this.
So that's directly related to Metcalfe's law, then.
Totally. As more and more people buy and sell and use Bitcoin, the network gets more secure and more liquid,
Right.
which drives up the value.
So, like, the early adopters of a cryptocurrency
Yeah.
could benefit hugely if it takes off.
Oh, yeah. Potentially, they could.
Because, like, if the network grows really big, then the value could skyrocket.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely a possibility. But, of course, there's always risk involved, too.
Right. Like, not every cryptocurrency is going to be the next Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah. Definitely not. Like I said, it's not a crystal ball.
Uh-huh.
It's more like a compass.
Right. Okay, so how does Metcalfe's law play into these other areas of cryptocurrency that we hear about,
Okay.
like DeFi and NFTs?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Those always sound kind of mysterious to me.
Well, let's break them down one by one.
Okay.
So first, DeFi stands for decentralized finance.
Okay.
And it's basically about building financial applications on top of blockchain technology.
Okay.
Things like lending platforms or trading platforms.
Right.
But without the need for traditional banks or institutions.
So it's like cutting out the middleman and letting people interact directly with each other.
Exactly. It's a pretty revolutionary idea, and Metcalfe's law is super relevant here.
Okay. How so?
Because the whole value of these DeFi platforms depends on the size and activity of their user base.
Okay, that makes sense. Like, if only a handful of people are using a lending platform,
Right.
it's going to be really hard to find borrowers or lenders.
Yeah, exactly. Like you need a critical mass of users
Uh-huh.
to provide enough liquidity for these platforms to work properly.
Okay.
Plus, a larger and more active network also makes it more secure.
Right. Security is super important with financial stuff, especially.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You need people to trust the system.
So if I'm getting this right,
Uh-huh.
Metcalfe's law suggests that for a DeFi platform to really take off, it needs to attract a ton of users to get those network effects going.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Cool. Okay, now what about NFTs?
Okay, so NFTs are non-fungible tokens,
Right.
and these are unique digital assets
Uh-huh.
that have been getting a lot of attention lately.
Yeah, I've heard about those things like digital art and collectibles.
Yeah, all that stuff, even virtual real estate. It's a whole new world.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is.
So where does Metcalfe's law come into play with NFTs?
Well, think about it like this. The value of an NFT is often tied to how scarce it is
Okay.
and its connection to a certain community or creator.
Okay.
So the more people who are interested in that community or that creator,
Uh-huh.
the more demand there's going to be for the NFTs associated with them.
So it's kind of like owning a rare piece of art or a limited edition collectible.
Yeah, exactly. Like a signed print or something.
Right.
The value goes up as the artist or the brand gets more popular.
Okay, I see.
And as more people join the whole NFT ecosystem, the value of those NFTs tends to increase too. It's those network effects in action again.
Right. So the more people involved, the more valuable things become.
Exactly. And it's
Yeah.
not just about the number of people, it's also about their engagement.
Right? Like how active they are.
Yeah, and how much they're willing to invest in the network.
Gotcha. So it's like a combination of quantity and quality.
Exactly. And speaking of virtual worlds, had you given much thought to the metaverse and how Metcalfe's law might apply there?
The metaverse, it's still a bit of a fuzzy concept to me.
Yeah, it is for a lot of people. Basically, it's this network of interconnected virtual worlds
Okay.
where people can interact and create and even build businesses.
So it's like a massive online video game or something?
Yeah, you could think of it that way,
Huh.
but with real-world implications.
Oh, wow. That's pretty wild.
It is. And the interesting thing is,
Yeah.
just like with NFTs, the value of a metaverse platform is very closely tied to how many active users it has.
Okay, that makes sense. The more people who are hanging out in there building things and doing business, the more valuable it becomes for everyone.
Exactly. And that's why a lot of people think that Metcalfe's law is going to be a huge factor in determining which metaverse platforms succeed in the long run.
That's fascinating. It's incredible how this one principle can tie together so much different aspects of the digital world.
I know, it really is. It's kind of like a universal law of the internet.
For sure. But we do have to remember that it's just one tool in our analytical toolbox.
Right, we can't just blindly apply it to everything.
Right? Like, remember that idea of diminishing returns? Where adding more users doesn't always translate to more value?
Oh yeah, that's an important caveat. Like, imagine a messaging app, for example.
Okay.
Initially, every new user adds value because they expand your network of people you can talk to.
Right.
But at a certain point, the app might become so overloaded with messages
Yeah.
that it gets really hard to find the info you need or connect with the right people.
Okay. So too much of a good thing can actually be a bad thing.
Exactly. Like that saying, too many cooks spoil the broth.
Right. Or too much pizza.
Exactly.
So network growth isn't always just a straight line upwards. There are complexities and nuances that Metcalfe's law can't fully explain.
Yeah, that's an important point.
So what are some other limitations of Metcalfe's law that we should keep in mind?
Well, as we've talked about, not all connections within a network are created equal. Like a social media influencer with millions of fake followers isn't really as influential as someone with a smaller but more engaged audience.
Right. It's not just about quantity, it's about quality.
Exactly. And that applies to any network, whether it's online or offline.
Totally. So the nature of those connections matters a lot.
Yeah, big time. Another thing to consider is that Metcalfe's law can be tricky to apply to what we call two-sided networks.
Two-sided network.
Yeah, like a marketplace.
Okay.
Where you've got both buyers and sellers.
Gotcha.
In that case, you need to think about the dynamics of both sides of the equation.
So it's like a double layer of complexity.
Exactly. It's not always straightforward.
So the takeaway is that Metcalfe's law is a powerful concept, but it's not a guaranteed predictor of success.
Yeah, it's important to remember that.
I need to use it wisely, along with some critical thinking.
Absolutely.
And a good understanding of the specific network that we're looking at.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, you've given me a lot to think about.
Glad to hear it.
I'm already starting to see Metcalfe's law at work everywhere I look now.
That's the beauty of these deep dives. Sometimes just shifting your perspective a little bit can open up a whole new way of seeing the world.
For sure. Okay, but before we wrap up, I'm curious about those other network models you mentioned.
Okay.
Like Reed's law and Sarnoff's law.
Yeah, those are interesting ones.
How do they compare to Metcalfe's law?
So Reed's law is all about the power of subgroups within a network.
Okay.
It basically says that the value of a network can increase even faster than Metcalfe's law would predict.
Really?
Yeah, when you start factoring in the formation of groups and subcommunities.
Interesting. So it's like the power of the clique.
Yeah.
Like those smaller, tightly knit groups can actually generate a ton of value.
They can.
Within a larger network.
Exactly. Think about online communities.
Yeah.
Or professional networking groups.
Right.
Those smaller, more focused interactions can be super valuable.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And what about Sarnoff's law?
So Sarnoff's law is a bit different.
Okay.
It's more applicable to one-way broadcasting models.
Like what?
Like traditional television or radio.
Okay.
And it suggests that the value of those networks actually grows linearly,
Okay.
with the number of users not exponentially like Metcalfe's law.
So it's a more gradual and steady growth.
Yeah.
Compared to the potential explosive growth of Metcalfe's law.
Exactly.
Okay, that's interesting. So each of these models has its own strengths and weaknesses then.
Yeah. It really depends on the specific type of network you're looking at.
So we need to choose the right tool for the job, basically.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to understanding network dynamics.
Well, this has been a super insightful exploration of how networks work.
It has been fun.
We've gone from the basics of Metcalfe's law to its applications in cryptocurrency, DeFi NFTs, and even the metaverse.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
We did, and I think the most important takeaway is that there's always more to learn and explore when it comes to understanding how these networks operate.
Absolutely. It's a constantly evolving landscape.
Yeah. It is. And on that note, I have a final question for you and for our listeners.
Okay, shoot.
Considering everything we've discussed today about Metcalfe's law and the power of networks, what emerging technologies or platforms do you think have the potential for explosive growth in the coming years?
Ooh, that's a great question, and one that I think deserves a lot of thought.
Yeah, like what's the next big thing that's going to grab everyone's attention?
Hmm.
And maybe even reshape the digital landscape as we know it.
Well, I have a few ideas, but I'd love to hear what you and the listeners think, too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess we'll have to save that discussion for another deep dive.
Sounds good to me.
All right, well, thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey through the world of Metcalfe's law.
My pleasure.
And until next time, keep your eyes peeled for those network effects at work all around you.